Hi guys, I am excited to be back. I had great intentions of making these videos much more frequently, but as good intentions go, I've been busy and lots of changes going on, and so I haven't been able to make them. Certainly not lack of interest. I love these. I love these topics. I love talking about these things. We're still doing the Sunday school class on Sunday mornings called You Can Ask That, and it's probably a favorite thing I get to do. And that extends, by the way, to you all, as my vicious Malinois enters the background there. If you have questions, you can send them to youkanaskthat@gmail.com. And I would love to see them, love to maybe do them in one of these videos, share them in Sunday school class, different things like that. What I want to talk about today is a subject that a lot of the questions are actually asking. The first video I did talking about Genesis 1 and 2, looking at creation. Out of that came a whole bunch of questions surrounding the idea of, okay, so what in Scripture is allegory and what is fact? What is allegorical? What is historical? And how do we know? How do we pick? How do we decide, sort of thing? Oftentimes these questions come about certain events or things that happen in Scripture that we are uncomfortable with or that we don't understand. And so the first warning is we as human beings are tempted to think of if there's something that is difficult to understand or I simply don't like, I will be tempted to make it, oh, that's allegory. If there's something that I love or that makes me look great in whatever I'm doing, that's obviously historical fact. So we have to be careful about that. They're not simply decisions that we're, picking what is what. There are lots of clues. There are lots of things in the writing and historical information as well. Also, another one is that we tend to think of things in the binary. Yes, no. And so when we ask the question, is it allegory or is it history, I think that misses it. While there are some things that are purely allegorical and some things that are purely historical, a lot of it is both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And there wasn't anything deceptive going on. The audiences all understood this was a style. We just miss it now. So sometimes they would take a historical event that everyone would know about and then, tweak it, change it a little bit, make it veer off to make a point, like we do with children sometimes, changing a story up or whatever. You see Jesus doing this in parables. Jesus would take a story that everybody knew, and everyone knew where it was going, and everyone knew how it was going to end. And then about 3/4 of the way through, Jesus would take a hard left and turn it on its head, change everything. That was the point of parables. So that's the first thing to look at. Some of the specific events that I get the questions on are creation. The creation itself, the 7 days, the creation of human beings. The flood is a huge one. The entire book of Job is a big one. Song of Solomon, which is hilarious. We'll get into that later. And so these kind of big events. And also, speaking of parables, some of the parables people want to talk about, is it really a parable or is it, a historical event? And so for the next several videos, I want to talk about some of those specifics, some of those specific things. In this one, kind of kicking things off, think of it as an introduction. I wanted to mention kind of what we're working with, that it's not necessarily either or. I also want to say that the Bible is not, wasn't lined up how we have it lined up. It wasn't sectioned in this way. We move books around and different Bibles sometimes, depending on what country they're from or what time period they're from, they will have different books or they'll be moved around in different places. We've talked about that some too. And so on that note, there's another caution on my ADD video here. Numerology is ridiculous and stupid. It is not a thing. It does not exist. People take numbers and scripture and verses and they use it to make these Bible codes and stuff. It's ridiculous and nonsense. one of the funniest parts about it is, they're always doing things like, okay, well, there's this many words in this verse. It's in English, guys. That nobody spoke English then. This was Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, so the word count isn't the same. They'll talk about the number of books in a section. Again, we split those out. Those numbers have changed dozens of times over the years, decades, centuries. And so it doesn't work. It's silly. So that is not what we were talking about at all. That said, numbers do carry some significance in the Bible. We see numbers that are repeated over and over again. We see 3. We see 7. We see 40. All kinds of different ones. Those are probably the 3 most common and the ones that we get the most questions about. And so you would also have the thing where Hebrew letters corresponded to a number. And so sometimes you could make something with those. Sometimes it's nonsense. Sometimes it makes sense. David's name. If you take the Hebrew letters and the Hebrew number that corresponds with, and this is just historical, this is just how it was done, it was cultural there, and you add those numbers up, you get 14. There's stuff like that. And like in Matthew's genealogy, Matthew says, there's 14, 14 here, and then 14 after David, 14 before David, generations. And in that, Matthew uses some of these things we're talking about. He leaves entire generations out in order to make the numbers work. Because, he's making a point. He's using almost like poetry. He's wanting to show Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the new David. Jesus is from the lineage of David. Jesus is the one that we were told about and promised about. And so, he tweaks the generations to make the numbers work. He does more poetry in there. There's a couple of names that he changes from how they actually are in the genealogy to kind of make some cool points. And we'll get to that. But again, that wasn't sneaky. It was beautiful, really. It was like poetry. He's making a point. And none of this was looked down upon. Shocking to us. It just is shocking to us because we want to read it as a textbook. We want to read it as, a science textbook that we bought for college, or history or law or whatever, take your pick. And it's not. It is a collection of works. The Bible isn't a book. It's a library with different types. It has poetry. It has song. It has allegory. It has history. It has teachings, which we call law, which kind of messes that up for us sometimes. So there's different sections in there. There's different writing styles. And the beauty of it is you have this entire library with one overarching theme. And you can follow the trails and see how that connects to show this promised Messiah and what that meant in the coming of Jesus. So, on the numbers, sometimes the numbers are important because numbers held significance. 3, we see oftentimes in this idea of kind of complete or perfect. 7, we see that a lot. Again, similar, complete, spiritually perfect in this sense. 40 we see a lot, and 40 is a trial or tribulation that is gone through and come out on the other side with a lesson, with a message. It was a transformative experience that you come out on the other side. It is testing, it is trial. 12 is another one. 12 is this idea, you have the 12 tribes of Judah, you have the 12 sons, you have the 12 disciples. And so sometimes I'm introducing this just to make the point that sometimes we get so focused on the number in the story being, the factually important thing. And while it could be sometimes, and sometimes I'm sure that it is, I think a lot of times, again, these authors who are wonderful, talented authors, they have the same, things that we look for in, New York Times bestsellers. They're very talented, and they use this. They will sometimes use numbers to show us, okay, this is what the story's about. We can see a number in place and go, oh, okay, that's the point. Like, this is what the story's about. This is where this is going. 40. This idea of going through this trial, going through this tribulation, going through this testing, and coming out on the other side. Moses' 40 years in Egypt, the 40 years wandering the desert, the 40 days and 40 nights of the flood, the 40 days of Jesus' temptation, all of these things. Were they all 40? I don't know. My point there is just to say, I think that the numbers can be used to show us from the authors, like, hey, this is what we're talking about. Does that change anything? No. Is it bad if we, think of it in those terms? I don't think so, and I'll make some points on that. Is it bad if we think that every single number is exactly what it said it was, in our same way of measuring those numbers, so to speak? No, that's not bad at all either. But it's just something to think about. The 40 years in the desert, people get really hung up on that, and nowadays people are really hung up on, because if it was 40 years and all those people, there should be these historical artifacts all around that area where they dropped things and left things and made camps and all of that. And I think we're missing the forest for the trees. Could it have been 40 years? Sure. But I don't think that was the point. And I don't think the author ever imagined that that's what people would take out of that story, is this number of 40 years is what we have to focus on. I think the point was the 40. The point was the 40. It was a testing. It was a trial. It was a transformative experience. So personally, I have absolutely no trouble with that not being a factual 40 years. I have no trouble with, the idea that based on our current reading and our culture and our time frame, wanting that to be a strict 40 years, that we're not finding archaeological evidence of that. That's not something that I hang up on. So all of that is wandering. Honestly, I was just excited to make a video. So this has been a video sponsored by ADHD, and hopefully you got something out of it. I'm a couple minutes over where I'd like to be, but thank you for watching. Send me some questions, and hopefully I will get you another video soon. Bye, guys.